3D scanning with an Artec scanner produces amazing results, but sometimes it's difficult to properly represent that captured data. Today we're going to use Blender to make your 3D scan data look polished and professional. This video has multiple sections, including a beginner's overview of the Blender software. You can make a selection here, or wait a few seconds for the video to start. Follow along by downloading the Blender projects referenced in this video using the links here or in the video description. Okay, so the first thing you have to do to get your data into Blender is export from whatever scanning program you're using. So I'm using Artec Studio 10 here, and this is a model of the Hulk that I had scanned. This was a 12-inch action figure. So I have my completed data here, complete with color and everything. I'm going to go to File, Export Mesh, and I am going to export this as an OBJ. All right, so the first thing you need in order to render in Blender is, of course, go and download the Blender software. It is free. It's free for commercial use. You can use this and the renders that you make in the Blender software for anything you want. If you go to blender.org, you can get the latest release, and we are using Blender 2.74. All right, we'll minimize that. If you check the video description, there is a link to download these two projects right here. The first one being a kind of a simple render. The second one being a more involved render that gives it the render some depth of field to make it look more like a photograph. What we're going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and open this first one and give sort of a quick overview of the Blender software. I'm also going to turn on my shortcut key display so you'll see the buttons that I am pressing. All right, so here we have the general Blender screen. This is not what it's going to look like when you first install it. It will only look like this if you open the projects that I've included. So if I come here, a couple things that you want to set up. You can open my project, and you'll want to check to make sure you are using the cycles render here at the top. It comes default using the Blender render. And then something else you want to check, it will make your renders go much quicker. If we go File, User Preferences, and come over to System, check this right here. So for the compute device, normally it's on None, which means it's going to use your CPU. And this is much slower than if you have an actual graphics card. NVIDIA specifically works really, really well. So you want to, if you have an NVIDIA card, you want to switch that over to CUDA and select your device. I only have one, so it automatically selected that one. Click Save User Settings, and you will be good to go. So a couple things you got to remember in Blender. When you're selecting an object, you're actually right-clicking on it. I can select it here in this window here. If I just single-click, it's actually going to move what they call the 3D cursor. And that, I'm clicking around here in the bottom left window here, that right here is where new objects will be placed when you import them into Blender. Down in the left-hand corner, I have a window set up for my flat views. So you can use your, if you hold Shift and click down on your mouse wheel, you can move around, pan around like this. You can use your mouse wheel by itself to scroll in and out. And a quick way to change your view is use your number pad. So I can snap to the front using number pad 1, number pad 3 snaps to the right, and number pad 7 is the top view. Those are the three views I use to position my objects. All right. So that's the general controls in Blender. If I select an object here, I can press the letter G, and that will grab it and let me move the object around. If I left click, it will place the object. If I hit escape, it will put it back where it was. I can, while I have an object selected, I can press the S key, and that will let me scale the object up and down. Make it bigger or smaller. Again, if I left click, it will place the object. If I press escape, it will put it back the way it was. If I press the R key, it will let me rotate the object. And I'm currently in the top-down view, so it's rotating on the Z axis. If I hit escape and move over to my side view and hit R, it's going to rotate on the X axis. And the front rotate is going to rotate on the Y axis by default. So those are a couple important keys to remember. Okay, let's look at the window setup I have here. So I mentioned that this is the bottom left is what I use to place objects. The bottom right is the node window, and you can change any of this. This is just the setup that I use to work in Blender. Nodes are used for applying textures and all sorts of really complex things in Blender. And we'll go over a little bit of that in a minute. Top right, I usually have as either a solid or a rendered 3D view. This gives me a preview of what my end result is going to look like. So I like having that there, so anytime I move something, it gives me a quick update. And then top left, this is where I generally have my final image render. So if I'm over here on the right-hand side and I click this little camera button here, if I click render, it's going to use my current rendering settings, and it's going to make a static 2D rendering of my 3D image. And I can press 1 to zoom in all the way. Pressing 2 on the number pad puts it at 50%. You can also just scroll in and out. If you scroll too far, it's just like any other JPEG image where it'll start showing the pixels. So 1 is the full-size view. I can click and hold my center mouse wheel and pan around to look at what this is going to look like. And if I hit escape, it will stop my render. One other important thing to note, all of these functions that I'm doing are active in whatever window my mouse is currently hovering over. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, over here on the right-hand side, let's look at the render settings real quick. So typically when you're rendering, you want to make sure that your device is set to GPU, so that's using your actual dedicated video card. And a couple other settings you can change. Your actual resolution. So right now I have my resolution set to 4K, but I'm rendering at 50%, which actually comes out to 1920 by 1080. I typically render at a lower resolution just to make the rendering a little faster until I have my final setup, and then I'll render at full resolution. And then one other thing here. Let's see. Oh yeah, right here, under sampling. Samples right here I have set to 100. That's typically what I use for a preview. You can actually set that lower. The lower you have this, the faster your render, but the more grain you'll see. So you can't see it too much. Maybe you can see it here a little bit in the shadows. You can see it's a little bit grainy. So the higher your resolution, the more rendering samples you have, the less noise there's going to be because it's making more passes, but it's also going to take a lot longer. And then, so that's the render samples. Preview samples is the number of samples it takes for this preview window up here in the top right. I keep mine set to 10. It's just enough to see basic shadowing and the overall layout. And then when you're done rendering here, you can export as an actual JPEG or PNG image. I have this set to PNG right now. I'm actually going to change this for the files that I export. I'm going to set this to JPEG. Quality to 100. Set it to RGB. And these are the settings that the files I'm going to make available for download will have. So now that this is set, when I come over here, when this is done rendering, I can hover my mouse over this window to make it active, press F3. It's going to bring up a window and ask you what you want to call it, so you can call it whatever you want. I already exported one here, which is also available in that file folder. So I can just hit Save as Image, and it will export whatever is in this window right here as a JPEG. And then when you're done, let me come back in here. You can view and do whatever you want with your final image. If I view this full size, you can see I actually rendered this at 4K resolution. So it's very high resolution. I used the higher samples, so there's not as much noise. Makes for a really nice, clean image. And that's the basic Blender overview. Okay, so this first project is going to be a very simple, basic project. If you download the data that I've provided in the video description and extract it, you will find a couple different folders. There's a folder called Simple and a folder called Depth of Field. So we are going to open this Simple project first. When you're done with this project, you should have a render that looks something like this. Here's the render at full resolution here. It looks very nice. It's got shadowing and everything. Looks a lot better than just a plain screenshot from Artec Studio or whatever scanning program you're using. What we're going to do, we're going to open Hulk.blend. Go ahead and open that. You, of course, have to have Blender installed already. I'm using version 2.74. And here we have our basic setup here. I'm going to change this top right view to a rendered view. And I'm already getting a pretty nice looking preview of what my final render will be. All I'm going to show you in this one is going over here to File, Import, OBJ, and we're going to import another file just to show you the process of importing. So this is on my desktop. I'm going to go into the Depth of Field folder that I provided, and I'm going to import the hand drill. So let's import the OBJ. Okay. So when it comes in the Blender, you're going to see something like this. It comes in, pretty much everything you import in the Blender comes in very, very large. Blender doesn't use real-world units, so we are going to press the S key and scale this down. And actually, I forgot to turn on screencast here. Okay, so now you'll be able to see here in the bottom left-hand corner what buttons I am pressing. So I'm pressing S again and scaling this down. G to grab it. And what I didn't do is, well, no, I guess I did kind of orient it. I'm going to orient this, rotate that 90 degrees. Look at my top view here. I'm pressing G to grab it, of course, R to rotate, and then S to scale. Look at this from the front view. We can grab this and we're going to put this right there so it looks like it's sitting on the bottom plane. I'm actually going to rotate this a little bit here, and we're going to put this over here. Rotate a little more. Okay, so now you can see in this top right corner here, we've got the, it's the model, but it doesn't have the color data. So what I'm going to do, when you first import something and you want to apply color, you actually have to deselect that by selecting something else or pressing the A key. So when you press the A key, it will select everything. Press it again, it selects nothing. Now I'm going to right-click and select my drill. As you can see over here in the bottom right, we don't have anything in here right now. So what I'm going to do, I need to go to my Materials tab, which is over here. It's this little circle here. Click there. And we're going to click this button called Use Nodes. What that's going to do, that's going to give us a couple boxes down here. And I can click and drag these. If you wanted to render something that didn't have color data, this may be all that you need to do. You can change the type of material, whether it's glossy or transparent or whatever you want to do with it. You can make those changes. You can change the color either here in the node screen or by clicking the color here. So you can change all that. I can click this, make it a little darker. Sometimes that helps a little bit for rendering. But what we're going to do, we actually captured color data with this scan. So I'm going to come over here in the nodes screen and press Shift A. And I'm going to go to Texture and then Image Texture. And I'm going to click to place that. And then I need to connect the color circle here to the color over here. And it's going to change this to kind of a default of purple. That's okay. What we're going to do is click Open here. And I'm going to go up, and I'm going to go into the depth of field and click, let's see, which one is it? Hand Drill Spider is the one that you want. Hand Drill Spider 0.jpg. So I'm going to click that, click Open, and wait just a second. And it has now wrapped that image around this. And I can reposition this just a little bit more. Okay. So when I'm done with that, I'm pretty happy with what I have here. I'm going to come back over to the render screen here. That's the render tab over in the top right. And I'm going to check my settings. Samples at 100, that's fine for what we're doing here. You may want to change that to about 500 or 1,000, depending on, when you get everything set up. If you want less grain, I think I rendered mine at 500 or 750, something like that. And we're going to leave this at 50%, which will do 1920 by 1080. When you do your final image rendering, you can move this resolution percentage all the way up to 100, and that'll give you 4K resolution. Makes for a really nice image. And I'm going to click Render. Actually, I'm going to change this to full screen. So what this is going to do, when I click Render, it's going to render here, of course, in the top left, because that's what I have this set to, but it will also give me a little image pop out here. And we're going to wait a second for that to render. Okay, we are just about done here. And that is complete. Again, so when I'm in this render viewing window, I can press 1 on my number pad to zoom in and go to 100% view. I did this at 1920 by 1080, so that's why it doesn't zoom in as much. This is 100% here. You can see it looks pretty good, but I've got some grain here. That's because I only did this at 100 samples. To get rid of that grain, you just increase your samples. And This is a great template to use for basic renders. It gives you some nice lighting that I've already set up, and makes your scan data look a little bit more impressive than just a screenshot straight from Artec Studio or your scanning program of choice. All right, just a couple other notes about this template. So if you look over here, I actually, these planes here, these are lights, right? So if I select one of these planes and come over to material, you'll notice that my material is set to emission, which turns these into lights. And that's what's giving me my shading and shadows and everything. So you can change the brightness on that depending on what you are rendering. But I found for the most part, I've set this up where I can just import something in very quickly, position it, scale it to the right size for whatever I'm trying to do, and just go ahead and render it. Okay, for this next section, we're going to look at a more complex setup. It won't be more complex for you. I've already provided the file. So it's going to be very similar to what we did with the more simple version. I'm going to open up this folder again. We're going to go into depth of field this time. And let's see. Let's look at the final render. So this right here is what you'll get out of this file. If we go to full size, again, I rendered this at 4K. This was a drill that I brought from home, and I scanned with the Artec Spider. Came out pretty good. So you notice here, this is nice and sharp, starts to blur a little bit at the back. And then if you look at the lines here, nice and sharp, it's blurred up at the front. And then the background image blurs a little bit, kind of like if you had taken a picture with a really nice DSLR or a similar camera. We're gonna make this in this next file. So I'm going to open up drill.blend, and again we have the same setup as before. I just changed one thing to help with the depth of field. I'm going to change this to my rendered view. I'm going to turn my keys on so you can see what I'm pressing again in the bottom left-hand corner here. And all right, so you notice same setup. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And then this time, I've got my two models. I have textured planes. I added a grid that I created in Adobe Illustrator, and then exported it and then tiled it to make it look real nice, give it kind of that mechanical grid type look. And then I have this yellow sphere here. So this right here is the focal sphere. I've set Blender to focus on this particular sphere, but when you render the image, it does not show up in the final results. So wherever we put this is where the camera will be focused. All right, so we're going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to go to File, Import, OBJ. This time, though, I'm going to go into the Simple folder, and we're going to import the Hulk model into this project. All right, again, it comes in really large, so I'm going to press S to scale a few times. You may want to zoom out with your mouse wheel here. There we go. Remember on your number pad, using your number pad, you can press 1 for the front view, 3 for the side view, R for rotate. I'm going to rotate this a little bit just to get this positioned a little bit. All right, almost done. All right, something like that. We want to scale this down a little bit. I can put this right here. Let's zoom in on my model. Make sure it's just sitting at the top. Just pressing G to grab it. It's a little big still. Let's just do that. Okay. That looks pretty good. I always like to make this just a little bit above the plane here. So it looks like it's sitting on it. Okay. All right, so you can see in the preview here, I have the model, but it's just white again. So we have to do what we did before. I'm going to deselect everything by pressing A and then reselect my Hulk model. Make sure I'm over here on the Materials tab in the top right. I'm going to click the Use Nodes button. I'll move these over. And then again, we press Shift A. Go to Texture, Image Texture. Connect your color on the image texture to the color on the diffuse node. And let's press Open. And I'm going to go back into the Simple folder. And we're going to use Hulk_0.jpg. Okay, so we have that imported. It looks really good. I'm going to select my focal sphere, and I want this to be focused on the Hulk's face. So I'm going to stick that right there on his face. And wherever this moves, that's where the camera will focus. So that's pretty good. Move it forward just a little bit. All right, so once you have that in place, let's go over to our Render tab. And we've got our samples at 100, so that's good. 50% of the 4K will give me 1920 by 1080. Okay, I'm going to say render to a new window. And click Render. And let's see what that looks like. All right, it's just about done. Just a couple more squares. Okay, so we're complete here. If I press 1 on the number pad, I can bring this to 100% size. If you notice, instead of being focused on the front of the drill, this is now a little bit blurred here. And we are focused on the Hulk. You can see by the way the lines are blurred that your focal point has moved from here to back here. So it's just a really simple way of changing that focal point and making some really nice looking renders. If we want to save this, like we did in the project before this, I can press F3. And I can call it whatever I want right here. And then hit Save as Image, and it's going to save it as a JPEG image. This one's a little grainy. I did it at 100 samples. And I think the original, the file that I showed right before this, before we started this section, was done at about 750, which gets rid of pretty much all the noise for this particular lighting setup. Now, if you want to vary the amount of depth of field that the camera uses, it's very simple. So this right here, this is your camera. You can also select it up here in the top right as well. So when you have your camera selected, you can come over here to the actual camera tab. And these are your camera settings. And the focal sphere right now is set to an f-stop of 2.8. And now remember with your f-stop, that's your aperture. The lower the number, the shallower your depth of field is. So if you want more things to be in focus, you're going to increase this number. And if you want less things, if you want to pinpoint an exact spot, you're going to lower that number. But this 2.8 seemed like a pretty good number that works for what we have set up here. And then the other variation, if you want to change this grid, maybe you want, I don't know, like a concrete texture or or a wood texture or just some other texture, you can select your plane. So that's this right here. We have this is the floor, and these are labeled up here in the top right. We have the floor, and we also have, this one's also labeled as the floor, but that's actually the back wall. I may change that in the files that I make available. If I select this and look in the node editor here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. What you would actually change in order to change that texture is this right here. So this is where the image texture is. This node right here is the number of times that it's tiled over the plane that I've created. So if I increase this to 60 and 60 again, my squares get smaller. If I change it to 20 and then 20 again, my squares got larger. So it just depends on the look that you're going for and the specific texture that you're tiling. In order to change this texture, you press this little folder button here on the texture node. And I'm using the blue grid squares, but you can change that to pretty much anything you want. You can play around with different textures and come out with the exact result that you're looking for. And that is the more in-depth, depth of field section of this tutorial.